I'm well aware that the idea that AGI might creatively destroy capitalism as we know it is going to strike people in so many different ways, from it being obvious to it being ridiculous hyperbole to, what do you mean? I thought AGI is going to supercharge capitalism. But I think there's a weird way in which, despite all the conversations and content about AI and its likely impact on society, there are some important gaps in our typical discussions. In particular, about the very likely near-term impacts on capitalism as we've known it. To explain why I say that, I'm going to touch on predictions about AI, the lump of labour fallacy, the history of government spending, economic theories, and more. So let's dive in. So, the idea of creative destruction was popularised by Joseph Schumpeter in the 1940s, and many of us have seen examples firsthand, such as how streaming destroyed the video rental market, and how mobile phones decimated the digital camera industry and the sat-nav industry, and more. And just as mobile phones disrupted a whole set of previous industries, so too it is looking like the general capabilities of the latest AI tools will likely disrupt whole swathes of jobs and industries. And I think the net result could soon disrupt the current balance of our political economy as we've known it. Now, I'm saying that, even though I'm actually quite skeptical about whether the cutting edge of AI is quite as advanced as some people think it is, especially as there's growing evidence that the large language models, LLMs, and the chain of thought or reasoning approaches built on top of LLMs, like O1 and O3 models from OpenAI, have some systematic problems that will limit what they can achieve. Indeed, there's an excellent recent talk by Andrej Karpathy, a well-known figure in the industry, who has worked for OpenAI and Tesla, where he talked about the current state of programming with these AI tools, highlighting the tension between, on the one hand, their superhuman capabilities, and on the other, their continued limitations, such as hallucinations, their jagged intelligence, their gullibility, and their inability to really learn new things in depth, which he refers to as a kind of anterograde amnesia. Their context windows are like a massive short-term working memory rather than true lifetime learning. So even though programming is an area in which these tools are already proving to be genuinely useful, Karpathy notes,
when I see things like, 2025 is the year of agents, I get very concerned. And I kind of feel like, this is the decade of agents. And this is going to be quite some time. We need humans in the loop. We need to do this carefully. This is software. Let's be serious here.
But then I also recognise that others take a much more radical view. For example, there's a recent report called AI 2027 that is getting quite a bit of attention at the moment, where a group have predicted that we're very soon going to see what others have called a fast takeoff, not only to full-blown AGI, but to superintelligence, an AI system that is better than humans at all tasks.
I feel like I should add a disclaimer at some point that the future is very hard to predict, and that this is just one particular scenario. It was sort of like a best guess, but we have a lot of uncertainty. It could go faster, it could go slower. And in fact, currently I'm guessing it would probably be more like 2028 instead of 2027, actually. So that's some really good news. I'm feeling quite optimistic about that.
That's an extra year of human civilization, which is very exciting.
Of course, the authors of this report are by no means the first to be seduced by the idea of an imminent so-called intelligence explosion. But I think it's notable that even calmer, more serious-minded voices, like Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, are saying things like,
my view is that once you get to that sort of stage of radical abundance and post-AGI, I think economics starts changing, even the notion of value and money. And so again, I think we need, I'm not sure why economists are not working harder on this if maybe they don't believe it's that close, right? But if they really did, that like the AGI scientists do, then I think there's a lot of new economic theory that's required.
That's still quite radical. But I certainly agree that we urgently need new political economic ideas, including about how our monetary system works, hence my interest in modern monetary theory, MMT. And yet, I don't think enough of our politicians and economists are seriously grappling with the very likely near-term implications. Of course, there is a huge amount of general talk about AI and how important it is for every sector of our economy. So let me situate exactly which parts of the discussion I think are not being talked about enough. So if this is where we are today in 2025, we've seen there's huge debate about the various possible scenarios for AI progress towards full-blown human-level AGI and then on to superintelligence. Some think it's going to be very soon, whereas many think it'll be slower, and some think it won't happen in our lifetime or even ever. But I'm going to park all of that discussion and instead look at this part of the curves, the part that is all but implied by the low-hanging fruit that is already visible today. Whatever will turn out to be the timelines, nature, and indeed likelihood of full AGI and superintelligence, our political economy has to go through this phase first. And we can be fairly confident that it will do so within the next, say, 10 years, or much sooner, because the required AI technology essentially exists already. It's just not yet evenly distributed. And so the first common gap in our discussions about AI is that we're often not talking seriously enough about the implications of this very next, relatively predictable phase. Look, of course it's more sexy and fun to talk about the possibility of a Star Trek-like post-scarcity world, and I enjoy those discussions. But even if that is going to happen one day, between here and there, we're already going to see some pretty significant changes that are both more urgent and more certain to happen. So already today, AI tools are genuinely useful at basic coding, basic copy editing, basic graphics design work, to mention just the most obvious examples. And sure, there are many questioning whether the current business models for these tools are going to ever be profitable, but their basic utility is pretty clear. And the same could be said for self-driving taxis that are a loss-leading reality today in a few cities, but that will probably one day become profitable and then spread to everywhere. The functionality is there. And
Amazon could soon have more robots than humans working in its warehouses. The Wall Street Journal reports Amazon nears the milestone after years spent working to automate tasks.
So even knowing that today's AI tools don't fully replace humans, they have proven that they can reduce the total headcount in organizations, as fewer people are needed to get the same work done. Already, this growing wave of automation is enabling large companies to cut their workforce even while their revenue is growing, and more broadly, it seems to already be having a noticeable impact on entry-level jobs for recent graduates. But I think the narratives coming out of the tech industry all too often give the impression that what we're seeing now is the start of an inevitable path towards the complete automation of all work.
So muscles have been replaced. Now intelligence is being replaced.
Yeah.
So what remains?
Maybe for a while, some kinds of creativity. But the whole idea of superintelligence is nothing remains. These things will get to be better than us at everything. In the meantime, I'd say it's going to be a long time before it's as good at physical manipulation as us.
Okay.
And so a good bet will be to be a plumber.
And then this perspective is reflected back in the broader public discussion.
And so I think right now we're at this phase of technology where we're trying to establish the human part of it, and we're not doing a good job at figuring out where humans need to be in the technology equation. And instead we're like, no, we're just going to automate everything. And sorry, we don't have a plan for people.
So we seem to have ended up with a default narrative in which jobs can be sort of split into two groups. Those that we can significantly automate already, and those that we cannot automate yet. And so from this, it seems like a reasonable prediction that whatever the long-term future of AI, in the next 10 years or much sooner, we'll see a lot of coders or taxi drivers and others retraining to do more manually intensive jobs like being a plumber or electrician. The longer-term vision of this narrative is that one day they'll crack things like dexterity and mobility, and then all the remaining jobs will be automated too. So then, there'll be very few jobs, if any, left for humans. And we'll have to consider things like a universal basic income. But I think this reveals a second important gap in the typical perspective used when discussing AI automation. We often fail to mention that there are many jobs that are not only impossible to automate now, but that I suspect we'll never want to have fully automated because they are so fundamentally about human connection and human culture. Teaching children is way more than just about developing skills in the next generation. It's also about mentoring and nurturing our children as part of a community. Doctors and nurses offer more than just prescriptions and treatments. They provide professional, compassionate experience and support during some of our most worrying times. And the list goes on. Social workers, counselors, scientists, artists, writers, and so on. So I think this is the alternative perspective that we should have in mind, where there will be many kinds of jobs that we simply don't want to automate. And then it's clear that during the next, more predictable phase of job automation, it'd be wonderful to have, say, more teachers per pupil, more doctors and nurses spending quality time with patients, more scientists working with AI tools to help us understand our world even more than we do today, and on and on. And then, if we do ever get to superintelligence and another wave of automation, so, for example, even manual jobs become automatable too, then again, it'd be great to have even more teachers, more scientists, musicians, mentors, and so on. So, even though these AI tools are generalists, making it hard to imagine new industries that these tools won't also be able to rapidly automate, it is still the case that we shouldn't fall for the fallacious idea that there is a fixed lump of labour that will be automated away bit by bit. However good AGI becomes, there's going to be plenty of important, useful, interesting work for humans to do. In some sense, the only problem, and it is a big one, is that much of this kind of work isn't fully funded by the capitalist private market. Many of the sectors that we won't want to automate require significant government funding. In contrast, the profit motive in the private sector will drive a relentless push for automation, so the headcount in the private sector is going to shrink. And we could choose, in response, to use government funding to help grow the headcount in, for example, the care and culture sectors. But it's worth briefly mentioning here Baumol's so-called cost disease, which is an explanation of why it is that goods and services whose production is harder to automate often get more expensive over time, whereas goods and services that are easier to automate usually get cheaper. So our very insistence that we want to keep humans involved in certain sectors means that they are likely to get relatively more expensive to deliver over time compared to those that can be automated. And so a growing headcount with growing relative costs might mean that the scale of these government-funded sectors comes to dominate the economy. So, when I suggested that AGI might creatively destroy capitalism as we've known it, I'm not talking about the end of property rights, or the end of money, or private companies and the stock market. I'm talking about another phase shift in the relation between the scale of the private market compared to the scale of government-funded work. If we look back at the history of this relation in the UK, we can see a previous phase shift that happened just after the two world wars. This first chart shows the scale of the workforce directly employed by the UK government, and the phase shift from before to after the world wars is dramatic and obvious. A second way to maybe capture better the scale of all government-funded work, whether it's direct or indirect, can be seen with this fascinating graph that shows the scale of government spending as a percentage of the UK's total GDP since the 1700s. Again, we can see the same phase shift from before to after the two world wars. And although there were, of course, many different factors involved in this earlier phase shift, it can partly be understood as a response to the massive rise in automation and new technologies from the war effort that meant that full employment was only possible in the UK if our government stepped in to provide extra demand in various key sectors of the economy, sectors that our society now deemed more important to fund. And we can see that a significant part of the extra government spending was on sectors like education, health and social security that often involve exactly the kinds of caring work that we probably won't want to fully automate even if we ever have superintelligence. Or it was spending on the kind of income support for pensioners and the disabled that could be seen as a precursor to a more widespread universal income support. And although many of the specific details vary, a roughly similar phase change in the scale of government spending from before to after the World Wars can be seen in many other high-income countries, including the United States. And it is also worth just noting that we've had different economic theories and narratives that have dominated our understanding of these different phases. Classical and neoclassical economics before the World Wars, then afterwards Keynesianism, challenged later by monetarism, and then the rise of neoliberal policies. So the question is, how does this graph continue into the near-term future? Or, more correctly, how do we want this graph to continue? Now, of course, there are a lot of fiscal conservatives who believe in a small state and essentially dream of going back to the pre-war neoclassical era of the 19th century. And yet, some of the most prominent voices who today wish to slash the size of government spending, like Elon Musk, then also go on to say things like,
looking at the most likely bright side, we're headed for an age of abundance where anyone can have any goods and services they want. It won't be a case of universal basic income, it'll be a case of universal high income is the most likely outcome.
But this obviously implies that after the arrival of superintelligence, they're expecting a huge rise in government spending to be able to provide universally available services and a high level of universal income support. And when looking at this rough sketch, don't forget the way that Baumol's cost disease will impact the relative costs of providing universal services that have any human component to them. So this dip in spending between now and then just doesn't make sense to me. Shrinking the role of our government at this moment in time will just accelerate the winner-takes-all dynamics from the capitalist-driven AI automation, leading to decades of massively rising inequality and probably social unrest that is not even in support of any clear long-term goal, because it's not expected to be the long-term, steady-state fiscal position. Indeed, as automation this time is likely to impact so-called white-collar, desk-bound work more, so it is likely to hollow out further the politically influential, university-educated middle classes, who will make a lot of noise when they can no longer afford their mortgage payments, start having to draw down on their savings, and no longer see the point in taking on student debt to get a university education. And a widespread reduction in middle-class incomes and spending could trigger both a negative financial spiral and a huge political backlash. So instead, it seems much more likely to me that as the wave of automation sweeps through our economy, as we go deeper into the age of AI, I suspect we'll see another phase change increase in the scale of our government spending in order to remain closer to full employment. But don't get me wrong, this isn't just about saving the middle classes. This is about tackling inequality across the board, rather than letting it worsen just as we approach a time of supposed abundance. And I think this would not only be a much more politically fair route to go down, where we share out more broadly the benefits of this AI revolution, but I also think it would be more economically sensible too, providing a much more stable and predictable route for our economy through the transition towards the possibility, one day, maybe, of a post-scarcity world. And just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that this would mean that all of the work funded by our government would be centrally managed or use direct government employees. There could be plenty of different ways to organise this work as is appropriate for different sectors. And I'm also well aware that I'm not saying anything here about the possible implications on tax levels or government debt levels, as that is a whole nother discussion and I'll leave that for other videos. But I will just note that we'll probably need our institutions to adopt new economic theories and narratives to make sense of this new political economic dynamic if it does become the new normal for half or more of our GDP to be linked to our government spending. as it was chartalists back in the early 1900s who first really highlighted the crucial role of our government in relation to our monetary system, I imagine that it could be some kind of neo-chartalist economics, like modern monetary theory, MMT, that will come to define our understanding of this next phase of capitalism. But of course, it may be some other form of post-Keynesian economics or something else. But if this next phase shift does happen, then it certainly won't be capitalism as we've known it throughout all of our lives to date. So all of the capitalists making huge investments today in AI will have built a tool that radically changes the nature of capitalism itself. Maybe not creatively destroyed, but certainly transformed. And there will be many economists who freak out at even the suggestion that we could have a healthy, growing private sector while our governments are spending in the order of 50% or more of our GDP. But I would just note that the previous phase shift that increased the levels of sustained government spending after the Second World War coincided with one of the greatest boom times in all of economic history. And I suspect that the same might be true for any country that responds to the potential productivity gains from AI by increasing government spending rather than by shrinking it. So this is one of the key political economic discussions that we should be having right now. What do we want our economic path forward into the age of AI to be? Do we listen to those who want to shrink back to the neoclassical economics of the 19th century? Or do we go forwards towards the economics of the 21st century and beyond? But what do you think about the scenarios I've been describing here? Do you think I'm making a plausible case for why we should make this phase shift to higher government spending? Or indeed, what do you think is a more plausible scenario for our future political economy? Please do continue the discussion in the comments below and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching.